So I recently realized that my mental model for Redis list data types was laughably, wildly inaccurate. I kept thinking about them like cold fusion lists, but they're completely different. They're more like arrays in which each item is a completely isolated and separate value. So to fix my mental model, I created a simple demo in which we have one page here that can post a message, which is essentially a JSON payload to a Redis list. And then I have a couple of other pages here that will block and listen for read operations on that particular list. So let's refresh our listeners here, and then we can start posting. Oops. Hello, good morning, how are you doing this fine Thursday? And as you can see, as I'm typing here, these different pages are blocking and waiting for items to be available on that list. Then they're immediately popping those items off the list and dumping to the pages in real time. Each of these pages will wait for about 30 seconds, and you can see here at some point the refresh listener link shows up. Now what I can start to do is add more messages. Again, how are you doing? And of course, since these are no longer blocking and waiting, they don't show up. So those messages are being pushed onto that Redis list, but they're not being popped, which means that the moment I refresh this, you'll see that again, we get this again, how are you doing? So immediately this got those messages, and now if I continue to write, woo, woo, party on with your bad self, right? It'll continue to get these. So let's take a look at how this is working. So to set the groundwork for this experiment, this is a Lucee Cold Fusion application, and I'm going to be using the Java Loader and Java Loader Factory to load the Redis or the Redis jar file, which is the Java driver for Redis. And you can see here I'm loading my jar files. These are not very important. I create a connection pool for the Redis objects, but mostly what to look at is on each request I'm exposing this with Redis function, and the with Redis function takes a callback, attempts to get a resource from the Redis connection pool, invokes that callback with the Redis object, and then returns or closes the Redis object, returning the Redis connection to the Redis pool. And essentially this with Redis function just creates a simple abstraction so that the calling context doesn't need to understand the nuances of dealing with the Redis connection pool. So now let's take a look at the right page. The right page is just a simple HTML form. We're submitting a message, and then on the server side processing, we're taking that message and we're composing it into a larger Cold Fusion struct, this list item, and then we're using the with Redis function to receive a Redis connection, and then we're pushing the serialized list value onto this Redis key, list messages, and then on the other page we'll be listening to the head of this list, waiting for these values to become available. So let's take a look at the read option. So the read page is going to sit and block for about 30 seconds, and we're just going to essentially loop until we pass that 30-second cutoff time. And for each loop iteration, we're going to be using the blocking pop operation on the left side of the list, or the head of the list. So as the right page pushes messages onto the tail, the read page is going to be blocking and popping items from the head of the list messages key. So for each loop here, you can see that if I have a result, so if the result, if there was a list item returned within the 5-second timeout, I'm simply deserializing it, dumping it to the page, and then just using some simple JavaScript to scroll to the bottom of the page. And that's the entire demo. Again, just a fun experiment here to get a better mental model for lists in Redis. I had, again, originally assumed that lists in Redis were sort of like lists in Cold Fusion, which is really just an abstraction over string manipulation. That's wildly inaccurate in terms of Redis. Redis really has lists that are like a bidirectionally linked arrays, where each item is a completely separate and isolated payload, which is very different from a Cold Fusion list. So just laughably wrong. My assumption was laughably wrong. But again, here, let's just quickly refresh. And we can see that each of these, good morning. And you can see that they're each blocking and waiting for items to become available. Redis is the bomb, diggity. And there we go.